Okay.
Because if you walk into a, place like, well, take any luxury hotel,
Hmm.
they will offer luxury at every level.
Oh yes,
But many
absolutely.
hotels still
Hmm.
will look at their tea,
Hmm.
and although tea will be drunk all the way through their business,
Hmm.
they don't take it seriously enough. So
Hmm.
they will offer, luxury. I've seen luxury hotels offer the same brand of tea that is being offered
At
by
Tesco.
a budget hotel, along
Chai
London.
is tea, and I don't know who named it. I'm not taking the name of that company, but I don't know who named chai tea. That was a bad idea.
And actually, the first deal that I got, which really kind of kickstarted the whole thing, was in the most remotest part of Scotland. And I remember my father dropped me at the airport, and he was like, it was never going to work. I remember I flew to Inverness, took a bus to go see these guys, did the deal, got back to Inverness, flew out the next day. And when I landed at Luton Airport, they had already emailed through an order. So I got in
Wow.
through the door of the car. My dad picked me up, and he was like, "How did it go?" And I was like, very casually, I still remember telling him, I was like, "Yeah, good." He was like, "What did they say?" I was like, "Well, they put through a £3,500 order," and that was my first. That was the first deal.
Okay. All right. Few years ago, I wasn't a tea guy nor a coffee guy. All right. And today, I am inclined a bit towards coffee. I'm still not fully a coffee person. I'm a bit inclined towards coffee, but I still manage to get some of the best tea producers, company director, to join me to have a conversation. Dananjaya Silva is the managing director, the third generation of PMD Tea, PM David Silva and Sons, which carries a lovely legacy of creating quality teas around Sri Lanka and now to the whole world. I tried some of the P.M.D tea variations like chai cinnamon and stuff like that. Those were really authentic, really actual quality ones. I am saying this, I'm endorsing this, so you can consider that. And I was like, Dhananjaya, let's talk about it on the mic. And here we are. So we will be listening loads of interesting things today from him about tea, more about tea, and about his business, him and his journey, about how businesses and family businesses work, how things get around over there. And yeah, PMD tea serves, as I said, some of the most beautiful and excellent teas around, which are in places like the Red Incarnation, the Stoke Park, and Stock Exchange, which are some of the best luxury places in UK. All right. So in today's menu, we have Dananjaya Silva. If you're watching and listening to us for the first time, then this is for you. In today's menu is a podcast where we'll be talking anything and everything under the roof of food and hospitality. We have got four segments. All right. One is business journeys, where we talk to professionals and business people around food and hospitality industry and get to know their story. Secondly, we have careers. How are different kind of careers in this one particular industry, how you can get in there, what's food consultancy and stuff, you can get to know that as well. Then there is a fun segment of entertainment called as Quarter Ke Kisse, where there are unfiltered stories of what happened when people got drunk at night. And then there is a last segment called as Food and Culture, stories about different food and cultures and traditions and nostalgia. You can find us on Spotify, Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and all other audio streaming platforms, and along with Instagram and YouTube as well for all the updates. And now we get into the conversations. Hello, Dananjaya.
So
I'm
Yuvraj,
glad you like this location.
I love it.
4 hours of my life over here.
Absolutely love it. If there's one location you could have picked, this sums up me. This is the
Uh-huh.
kind of place that I like to be in.
I'm glad we are sitting on a bank of a small stream, and that's lovely. With that said, with this one kind of luxury, can you take us to the tea's luxuries, beginning and everything, how the story of your tea began actually?
How the story of my tea began.
Mm-hmm.
So that's an interesting story. That probably starts, I guess the story of the tea starts with the story of our company, and then also the story of our company, but also very much, the story of Sri Lanka as well. So our business sort of starts in Sri Lanka. For those of you who don't know, we're a small island nation. that sits underneath India. We're the world's largest tea producer in the world, but we're the world's second largest exporter of tea,
Mm.
of black tea. So our journey starts sort of in the 1930s. Starts with my grandfather. He was a young man living in southern Sri Lanka, and in the 1930s, the world was going through a global depression. So
Mm-hmm.
in Sri Lanka, we had mass unemployment at the time. So
Okay.
I believe our population was about 9 to 10 million at the time,
Mm-hmm.
and two-thirds of the Sri Lankan population were actually unemployed. So the people who had jobs at that time during the global depression,
Mm-hmm.
they either worked in the Ceylon civil service, or they worked in the judiciary, or in the government sectors, or they worked in tea. So they were either working directly in tea plantation,
Okay.
or they had a business connected to uh,
Tea.
to to tea.
Okay.
And they were really the only two sectors.
So tea was like the big industry, like the steel industry,
Huge,
connecting all vertical and horizontal integrations.
absolutely
Okay.
huge in Sri Lanka, because the shipping industry works as a result of it. The banking industry works as a result of it.
Okay.
And all these other support industries would happen. And one of the support industries of that is transportation, and that's actually where our business starts. So my grandfather's family is from southern Sri Lanka. In fact, we're from the most southernmost tip of Sri Lanka, which is known as Devinura.
Mm-hmm.
And when he was a very young man, his brother had been working on a tea estate. He'd been working in a shop on a plantation, and my grandfather had sort of dropped out of school. We have a tradition in our family of being very rebellious and not
Okay.
doing too well at schools.
This
Um,
question will be interesting during the Tamil Tigers question.
yeah, so very sort of rebellious. I think myself included at school.
Mm-hmm.
So he had sort of his brother had taken him up to the tea estates, and he'd started working in a shop. And his journey was that he had sort of grown from that role in the shop to coming back to own the shop, to growing his business piece by piece, and eventually his business sat as very much an estate supplier and a tea transporter.
Uh-huh.
So to put that into context, a tea estate in Sri Lanka will have anywhere north of 1,000 to 4,000, 5,000 people living on a plantation.
Okay.
So if you go back to the 1940s, 50s, even till very recently, to get 5,000 people off a tea estate and get them into the local town for them to buy their provisions doesn't really happen. So our business would bring in everything that a tea plantation would need for their workers, and then on the return journeys, we would warehouse and we would transport tea. So that's where PMD Tea starts from. It
Mm-hmm.
starts in an area of Sri Lanka called Muscalia,
Mm-hmm.
which is you know where Adam's Peak is, or Sri Pada, as we call it in the subcontinent. That's where our business starts.
Mm-hmm.
And today, our business does something very different, but very much what we do today is rooted back into the Muscalia Valley, rooted into those, into where we started from.
Okay.
So that's where our journey starts from.
So when that was happening, so your grandfather said you started it, like, and everything. How was exactly like? So you said he had a tea plantation and stuff like that. So that's where he started with these things only, and then he grew it up.
No, so he started on a tea plantation.
Okay.
So there was a tea
So he
plant.
was a worker or like owner.
So the way it kind of worked was that on plantations in those days in Sri Lanka,
Mm-hmm.
they would
This is
they
1930s, 40s. You're
this is
talking.
1930s, 40s.
Okay.
All of those plantations in the central part of Sri Lanka were owned by the British.
Okay.
So the British had sort of come in almost 100 years before,
Mm-hmm.
and they had sort of come in 100 years before, and they had actually set up as coffee plantations.
Mm-hmm.
And in those days, it was pure jungle, kind of like the terrain that you can see to the left of the camera here.
Mm-hmm.
This is what the Sri Lankan upcountry was like. Thick jungle, and the British government at that time sold land in Sri Lanka to young, enterprising young men. Mainly, a lot of them came from the northeast of England,
Mm-hmm.
and they were, brought to Sri Lanka, and they were basically, they could buy land like this for very cheap,
Mm-hmm.
but they had to go in and they had to clear the land and they had to cultivate it. So this started in about the 1830s, and what they started cultivating in Sri Lanka at that time was actually coffee. So by 1865,
Hmm.
Sri Lanka, or Ceylon as it was then known, was the
Sri Lanka what?
Sri Lanka was previously known as Ceylon.
Ceylon.
Yeah,
Okay.
so in 1865 we were known as Ceylon, which is the colonial name for Sri Lanka.
Okay.
And by 1865, Ceylon was the world's largest coffee exporter.
Okay.
So coffee was the main crop. But around the same time, we had a disease that came in, and it knocked out all the coffee bushes. It's known as Hamelia vicetrix. It ravaged the country and it destroyed a lot of fortunes that were built. These same tea planters, many of them went back to England. Many of them, took their own lives because they'd lost their fortunes. But many of them started to convert their plantations from coffee to tea.
Mm-hmm.
So many of the upcountry plantations at that time were owned by British business. So on those plantations, they had brought in workers from India.
Mm-hmm.
So they were the people who actually did the hard work, clearing these things, picking tea, building factories. They were the ones who did the hard work. But around these, now imagine if you've got jungle like this and
Mm-hmm.
you're clearing jungle, you start to have towns that start to come up.
Of course, yeah.
And into those towns, because it was jungle, populations from other parts of the country started to come in. So he was one of those people who came in in the 1930s, and he had sort of come on to work on a in someone's private business that was based on a tea estate. So it was a general shop,
Mm-hmm.
because I mean, you imagine you've got all these workers on a tea estate, you can't get them off the tea estate
Mm-hmm.
because between the tea estate to the town there's a lot of distance.
Okay.
So they would have these small shops on estates,
Okay.
and he came to work on someone's shop.
Mm-hmm.
And 5 to 6 years later, he ended up buying that shop, and that was his first business. And that started on a tea estate called Brunswick. So the family that built that tea estate, their grandson is my friend, and he lives not too far from me. So we get together,
Mm-hmm.
all these years later for a curry and a beer every so often, and a
Okay.
cup of tea and a chat. So yeah, a long,
Chai
long.
is tea, and I don't know who named it. I'm not taking the name of that company, but I don't know who named chai tea. That was a bad idea.
So there's an interesting story with that. So I mean, if you look at India, they call it chai. If you look
Yeah.
at China, they call it cha.
Yeah.
In Japan, they call it osha, and many varieties of this word chai or
Yeah.
cha.
Yeah. Hmm.
But in English, we call it tea,
Tea.
because actually tea is a Portuguese acronym. It's a
For
Portuguese acronym which means Transportus Aeribus Aromaticus, and it means the transporting of aromatic herbs. And it came because it was the Portuguese who first went to China, brought tea into Europe,
uh-huh.
and when they brought it into Britain as a wedding gift for a Portuguese princess who was marrying into the British royal family,
Uh-huh.
on the outside of the boxes it was stamped T.E.A. So that's where the word tea comes from.
Yeah. All right. So it's not even British then.
It's not even British. I mean, many Brits don't even know what tea means,
Yeah.
but that's what tea means. It's a Portuguese acronym.
All right. And how about your father then? You when we were talking previously, you
Yeah,
said when you come in now, you want to build a slab and leave it for the next generation.
yeah.
What was the slab your father had?
So that's a really interesting one. So my grandfather built this business,
Mm.
the very foundations of it. So he was, and he was very much about the plantation community. So like I said, he had a trucking enterprise.
So he knew the grassroots level was that of that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And
Mm.
the people knew him because he grew up in it, right? He
Mm.
grew up in it. His business came through that,
Mm-hmm.
So, and he had many arms to it. So on one side, he was transporting and warehousing teas. The other side, I mean, you imagine, like, go back 70, 80 years. If you're in a remote environment like this, if you're working, what fun things are there for you to do?
Oh yeah.
In many cases, there's not a lot. There's no nightclubs in those days, and whatever else. And there still isn't in the upcountry.
Hmm.
And one of the things that another part of his business was that he used to have cinema halls, so families would come to watch a lot of South Indian films because they were the original plantation workers had come from South India.
Mm-hmm.
So he had that, and then he also had a rice milling business.
Mm-hmm.
So my father he then had 3 sons, my father and his brothers,
Mm-hmm.
and they very much sort of carried on that business. But you know what South Asian families are like. There's always a lot of politics and complications that happen along with it.
Oh yeah.
And my father, and his brothers sort of had come to England to study, and he spent most of his life here. He spent
Okay.
most of his life here in England, and subsequently where we were born.
Mm-hmm.
So I think from my grandfather's time, and I guess we'll get into other bits
Mm-hmm.
about why certain growth things haven't sort of happened at
Mm.
the pace that you'd probably want them to.
Mm-hmm.
I think their generation was very much a generation of sort of holding things.
Okay.
Not so much sort of not
Oh
so much.
yeah. I know what you say. It's like when these employers, when they look at Gen Z, they are like they aren't understanding what Gen Z exactly wants at the workplace. But now when I was looking into the study and marketing and stuff like that, millennials are all about holding the place and sticking to it and working along it and getting it.
Yeah.
Boomers were all about survival.
Yeah.
So whatever you have, just keep it
Yes.
properly.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then
Very true. Yeah.
yeah, and then millennials were about sticking it, but
Yeah.
Gen Z is all about no. I want it properly. I want it good and nice quality. If I don't get that, I'm gonna switch.
Yeah.
So of course, a generation to generation thing. So I get what you're trying to say.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You know, so that was very much their sort of generation.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I came into the business, I came in because I guess I never planned to come in. I had, you know, never ever planned to come in. I'd sort of spent most of my life growing up here in England, and I actually wanted to join the army.
Okay. Over
Uh,
here.
Over here, yeah. I actually wanted to join the
You
army.
lost a soldier.
You know, I mean, I like the outdoors environment. I'm very at home here.
Mhm.
Very at home in this type of environment.
Mhm.
But then, just as I was finishing university,
Mhm.
my uncle died,
Oh, cool.
and I don't know. I look back on it now, and I think, you know, maybe, you know, something deep in my sort of, you know, soul just awoke,
Mhm.
just like that,
Mhm.
you know, and it just made me think I have to go back to Sri Lanka. I never ever planned it, and I ended up tearing my hamstring when I went on sort of selection for the army.
Oh,
So
cool.
they told me to sort of come back a year later or whatever, and I ended up, you know, traveling. I went back to Sri Lanka and I organized myself a tea course
Mhm.
just because I didn't want to come back and sort of get into looking for a job and, you know, going through the conventional way of life.
Okay.
And while I was in Sri Lanka, I spent about, you know, north of 6 months there
Mhm.
learning about tea. I organized myself a self course about, you know, what is tea from very much the grassroots, from the
Mhm.
scientific point, from the TRI
Mhm.
to the estate
This was
sector.
when you were 22, 23, right? You told
Yeah,
right now. Yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
But I graduated university at 22,
Mhm.
and I think I just turned 23 and I went to Sri Lanka.
Okay.
So I've been traveling in Africa for a bit, and then
Mhm.
I went to Sri Lanka, and I just went to learn about tea.
Okay.
And in doing that, I went to learn about tea because I wanted to be outdoors and I didn't want to, you know, go and start looking for a job and everything else and
Mhm.
get serious about life.
Okay.
While I was doing that, I ended up falling in love with tea. I
Okay.
ended up falling in love with tea. I ended up falling in love with the people. I ended up falling. I guess in a lot of ways, I went back to my roots, you know?
Just one thing over here. Probably if you might have attended or have seen Dananjaya in trainings, you might see how passionately he talks about those. Maybe you can check his YouTube channel, and that's why probably is the consistency of 3 continuous years of those videos. Today we are gonna check the matakale. Today we are gonna
Yeah,
check the silver tips and this and that.
yeah.
Yeah.
You know, so it was, you know, I just, you know, I just flowed with it, you know?
Okay.
I just flowed with it. And at the same time, because at the same time, I looked at our family business and it was going through a lot of changes and things.
Mhm.
But I also looked at the landscape ahead
Mhm.
and I realized that that business of the transportation was never going to carry on.
Okay.
And I didn't want, there was a lot of, I don't know, I guess
So it was just about like taking the tea to the like distributors. That's it.
it was taking the tea from the factory
Mhm.
to the buyers in Colombo who
Mhm.
would then blend it
Uh huh.
and who would then ship it anywhere around the world.
Okay.
So and then also the key point, Mr. Raj, was that when I was on estate, many of my friends in England would call and they would say, "Hey, you're making tea on these tea estates. Where can we buy this tea?"
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
In England, where can we buy this tea? And it
Hmm.
kind of raised a question for me because I was working on this tea estate, and a tea estate works 24 hours of the day.
Oh yeah.
You pick your tea during the day, you do all your agricultural work during the day,
Mhm.
but you make tea at night.
Okay.
Right? So we make tea at night. So it's a 24-hour operation that happens on a tea estate. Many people don't realize this. They put a tea bag in, they put their water, and they drink it. They don't realize that tea estates are a 24-hour operation. And I remember my friends calling and saying, "Hey, where can we buy your tea?"
Mhm.
And it made me think, like, where can they buy this tea?
Yeah.
Right?
And when was this happening?
This is 2010.
Oh, no Amazon. Oh, sorry. Amazon was emerging, I guess.
Kind of emerging, but like, you know, it raised a real good question. Like,
Hmm.
actually, where can they buy this tea? Because we're
And this
taking
was the time of the revolution where Google was also
come
just coming into the
yeah,
picture. Yeah.
coming into the picture as well.
Hmm.
So I kind of looked at it and I kind of thought, that's a really good point. But at the same time, because I was doing the work, you know, digging holes, picking tea, you know, going to, you know, inspect this, going to the factory at night to learn about manufacture. You know, you see the effort people make. You
Hmm.
see
Of
the
course.
effort people make to make a cup of tea.
Hmm.
and that effort is just disappears.
Yeah.
So we make all this tea, we fill it into these big sacks of tea. One of our lorries would come, we would dispatch the tea to the lorry, and then it goes to a buyer in Colombo. They would blend it with many other estates, and then it would go to an international buyer who would blend it with teas from all around the world. And then you, the consumer, have no clue where your tea is from.
Yeah.
We, as the producers, have no clue where our tea is going to, right?
Yeah.
But then and I started to think, this doesn't happen anywhere else.
Oh,
if
yeah.
you buy a bottle of wine, it tells you which country it's from. It tells
Oh.
you which estate it's from, which
Mm.
region it's from.
True.
If you buy, a bottle of whiskey, it says the same thing. And in many parts of the food and beverage world, you get to know what this product is, where it's from, who made it, how it's made, how it changes. And I thought to myself, well, why are we not doing this with tea? Why is it that these producers have become totally voiceless? And that's really where I thought, okay, there's a story here in what we as a country make and what we as in the tea sector make. And there was also this vehicle in our business that had been entrusted to bring this tea to to market. And I thought, you know what? Why not combine the two and take that forward? Because not only would I be able to take my family business forward another generation, but also I'd be taking a wider message of what people do on tea estates to people who are drinking tea. And tea is the world's second most consumed beverage after water.
Oh yeah.
Right? So it's kind of ironic that you've chosen the place as well, right?
Okay.
That after water,
Uh-huh.
tea is the world's second most consumed beverage.
Uh-huh.
But people don't know where their tea comes from.
Uh-huh.
So that's really where the concept of PMD tea starts. It's the marriage between my family business and its roots to looking at how do you change this trend so that the producer gets a better deal and the consumer gets a better deal. So that's what it is.
Okay, so just to quickly, producer gets a good deal. You pointed that out. If you might remember, I had put in front of you Amul. That was the time when we were talking about this conversation. That was the time when I had recently finished Amul's podcast, where I'm still yet to understand it. But he told the managing director or the person who was talking, he said that what you do is you buy at the highest rate from the producer and sell it at the lowest rate to the consumer. That's what Amul does, and Amul is still one of the largest milk producer, or for that
Yes.
matter, companies in India. So that's a thing. I don't know if it happens in your thing, but it's win-win for both the parties.
Yes.
So that's the thing. What on the other hand, when you were getting into this, were your learnings and personal struggles on a personal level?
On a personal level, what were my learnings at the beginning?
Learnings at the beginning, and what were you struggling with personally? Of course, it's not like, oh, you got on in the business and you picked up. You had your own set of personal struggles, even though you
Yeah.
might be joining the business of your family itself.
Yeah, so I think my business was the only thing that I really started with was the name that I put to the tea. In terms of infrastructure and everything else, there was nothing. So it was just literally me and a laptop
Okay.
and a few ideas. And actually, my brother was in the business at the time. So it was literally that. So at the beginning, I think, I guess the biggest asset that I had, and also probably the biggest disadvantage that I had, was my naivety.
Okay.
Right? So although I had this business name, people in Sri Lanka knew it, but I was starting here in England and nobody knew it. Right? So in some ways, you had a bit of confidence in that if you called a tea estate and said, hey, I've got a lorry load of horse manure, they would at least give you the time of day to see it. But when you're calling a hotel like the Stock Exchange and saying, hey, I'm calling from PMD Tea and I'd like to show you my teas, they're like, who? We don't know who you are, right? And they'd put the phone down. So, I think one of my biggest...
Stock Exchange didn't do that.
No, Stock Exchange didn't do that, right? To be fair, they weren't even a hotel at the time.
Yeah.
But I think the biggest thing was also my naivety as well, because I had thought, you write things on paper and you can very quickly write it. We're gonna buy this, we're gonna package it like this, we're gonna sell it like this, and if we do X amount of this, we'll have this much, and then that's our break even, that's our this, and this is the profit, and then we're gonna put that into here, and we're going to do our website, and you have all these plans. It's very easy to write down. But when you go to start and you
Uh-huh.
hit
Uh-huh.
pothole, hurdle, whatever it is, then you start. That's when your real business plan starts.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah,
So
so
we had a
true.
lot of that.
Yeah.
We had a lot of that. But actually, the good thing was because when you start a business and you start at a very young age,
Mm.
you have a lot of naivety. So you
Mhm.
don't realize the real dangers, the real pitfalls, because you don't know. So you're just exploring and going along, which is actually really nice because as you start to go through your business journey, much like with life, you start to assess things because you start to learn more, right? So
Hmm?
then you have to check yourself to realize, am I being as risky as I was at the beginning? And sometimes no, because now you have more to lose,
Yeah,
right?
and more
You
knowledge and experience as well. Yeah.
precisely,
Yeah. Hmm.
so those were so right at the beginning there was actually a lot of that. There was a lot of that in the beginning where actually my naivety was an advantage and it was a disadvantage. The advantage was that I literally just picked up the phone to anywhere and everywhere in the country.
Okay.
And actually the first deal that I got, which really kind of kickstarted the whole thing, was in the most remotest part of Scotland,
Okay.
up in the Highlands in a place called Aviemore. And I went to go see a train company
Mm-hmm.
and offered to do them a private label tea named after them, and offered to create their own sort of pack of tea. And I remember my father dropped me at the airport, and he was like, it was never going to work. I remember I flew to Inverness, took a bus to go see these guys, and did the deal, got back to Inverness, flew out the next day. And when I landed at Luton Airport, they had already emailed through an order. So I got in
Wow.
through the door of the car. My dad picked me up, and he was like, "How did it go?" And I was like, very casually, I still remember telling him, I was like, "Yeah, good." He was like, "What did they say?" I was like, "Well, they put through a £3,500 order." And that was my first. That was the first deal.
That's nice. Yeah.
But in some ways, it was really good because it gave you the confidence to go. Do you know what
Of
I'm doing?
course. Of
People
course.
understand.
Of course.
But at the same time, it gave enough power to sort of get that concept. Look, people understand what I'm doing.
Hmm. Yeah.
The bit
And also you understand, okay, how you put it through so that people understand.
precisely.
Yeah.
The bit that was harder was if you take the next year, 2 years,
Hmm.
is that all the other deals that we got weren't as easy as that one.
Okay.
They weren't as easy. We had to go on much longer journeys, take a lot more rejection, change our product a lot more, and get it right. And you never really get it perfect, so you're constantly evolving it.
Hmm.
But yeah, that was that first, call it luck, call it right place, right time, whatever
So
it is.
yeah, so the first one was where you like molded your product and strategies as well.
Yes,
Okay.
yeah, and then there were some bits that we tried out at the beginning where we thought, look, we're going to do tea bags.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to sell it to the bottom of the market very cheap, and we'll use that money to go to the luxury end.
Okay.
We
Okay.
realized that actually, after doing a pallet of this stuff,
Mm-hmm.
there's no way we're ever going to sell this.
Okay.
No one wants to buy it.
Okay.
We can't compete on price. And
Okay.
actually, we had two strands. We just basically threw one dice this way, one dice that way,
Mm-hmm.
and it just so happened that this road
Hmm.
worked. So we went down that one,
Mm-hmm.
and we changed the business plan from going down this one.
Okay.
So I think when you're in business, you'll stay in business if you're not stuck in your ways. If you realize, look, there's no way I can go through this road.
Hmm.
I have to recircle myself all the way around
Uh-huh.
to get to that side.
Mm-hmm.
You will make it. But if
Yeah.
you're so intent on going through this way,
Then it may or may not work.
it may or may not work. In
Yeah.
most cases,
Hmm.
it might not work.
Yeah.
But sometimes people are afraid to say, look, I took the wrong path. I've got to change.
Hmm.
Uh,
Yeah, that's there.
you know,
I understand that. I mean, you can't just generalize it. There is a
no.
lot of things. Yeah. So you said, so this was one of the major turning points. My friend says though one thing, okay, in business or maybe in services or whatever, it's just very hard to get the first client.
Yes.
But when you get the first client, things start rolling in.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, that was a major turning point where we
Mm-hmm.
got that first client, and it gave us so much confidence to go and knock on the doors of other clients.
Mm-hmm.
Then we stayed in Scotland as well, and we went to, it was the Old Course Hotel. That was our first sort of hospitality kind of contract that we'd done. And I remember that year Tiger Woods had sort of Tiger Woods had played the Open in St Andrews,
Okay.
and had been at that hotel and everything,
Mm.
and they were revamping their tea menu.
Mhm.
And you know, we went there, went there, spoke to them. That was during the snow. Actually, there was a really bad snowstorm in 2010.
Please.
Slept in my car. I got up at 4:30 in the morning, went to that meeting.
Mhm. Mhm.
And they really liked the product. They told us to come back in 2 months' time
Mhm.
with a wider set of products and to look at doing their menu. So that was another major turning point,
Okay.
and that gives you the confidence to
This
you
is
know
happening in England.
this
Okay.
is happening in England to take the next step and the next step and the next step.
Mhm.
And while you're taking those steps, you're not hitting every contract. You're
Mm.
not getting a yes at every point. You're
Okay.
probably getting a yes in every 20 or 25. But
Mhm.
it gives you that confidence to keep going.
Oh yeah, 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 for
It
sure.
gives you
Yeah.
that confidence to keep going.
I just read just one Twitter thread just before like yesterday or today that one right decision will make up for all the bad decisions
Yeah,
which and it make it feel like those were nothing.
absolutely. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. So that's how we sort of grew it and sort of picked up the momentum for it.
Hmm. So what did you bring onto the table? What were the gaps which you saw? First, tell what your grandfather put in something, your father put in something. First, tell us that,
Yeah.
and what when you saw your father putting something, what was the thing which you put onto the table by identifying whatever it is, apart from what you told by expanding the business slowly in England
So I think
and UK. Sorry.
yeah,
Hmm.
I think what I put onto the business was looking at things in a very different way.
Okay.
Looking at things in a very different way because we had been doing what we had been doing for such a long time. And sometimes when you come in with fresh eyes to say, look, we're going to go from an estate supplier and essentially a logistics provider, and we're going to go to the other end of the value chain in tea, right?
That is the
That is the
distributor.
yeah, that is creating your own brand,
Okay.
value adding tea,
Hmm.
you know, and going direct to consumer,
Okay.
cutting out all the middlemen, right? To say, look, we're going to go from this point, instead of giving it to the buyer and they give it to another brand and it's sent, we're going straight from here, we're getting the tea and we're going straight to the consumer.
Hmm.
We're putting it in your cup for you just to lift your cup and
Hmm.
put it in your mouth. I think that's what I brought. I think I not to blow my own trumpet, but I just looked at it in a very different way.
Hmm.
I looked at it in a very different way and I looked at what was the foundation and how could we take that foundation but build something very different.
First or second floor on top of that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
build something very different and repurpose
Hmm.
the foundation for something else. You know?
Okay. So getting into the concepts of the tea empire.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So what's the empire? If you look into PMD tea, PMD tea has various kind of concepts inside them. Then there is what I have seen on YouTube.
Yeah.
There's Buyers Tea Club. There's Empire Tea State. There's University of Tea. All of this concepts.
Yeah.
So what's the Empire Tea State concept first?
So
Yeah, you
yeah,
can tell that
what
first.
is that? So I mean, I think what you're referring to the Empire State of Tea.
Okay. Okay.
So I think at the time when we did that, when we shot that video, it was very much about blending sort of the old with the new.
Okay.
So if you think of how tea comes about around the world,
Mm-hmm.
it comes about because of the British Empire.
Okay. Yes, of course.
So you have the tea. For those of your viewers who don't know about tea, tea was exclusively grown in China.
Yeah.
Exclusively grown for
Hmm.
thousands of years. It's something deep rooted in the Chinese culture. It
Of
came
course.
from China.
Yeah.
All tea that came to Europe initially came from China.
China, yeah.
The
And then the
British is
Chinese people were like, no, we are not going to give you that.
yeah. I mean, the British wanted. I mean, they only sold their tea for gold and silver. The British wanted, to do a trade deal. They weren't keen. And this is where a lot of British colonial history comes in. With India, with the growing of opium in India, that being shipped to China. The Chinese being poisoned with opium.
Yeah.
So very much tea has a tea. You know, tea is a product that people have gone to war over.
Oh, yeah.
Tea
Yeah.
is a product that
Yeah.
has been central to Britain and its culture and its sort of colonial history and legacy. So that's where the word empire comes from. State is very much to do with a state, and also that tea estates are very much states on themselves. You have this is one part of the world. If you visit Sri Lanka, you'll find, creches, you'll find schools, you'll find maternity clinics, you'll find, temples, you'll find shops. It's a very much a state within a state,
Okay.
and people, live within that community.
Hmm.
And tea is tea, so it was blending the old with, the people who are very much part of that story
Hmm.
and that final product. That's what Empire State of Tea was,
Hmm.
and is. And it's about, bringing that heritage, that history, that flavor, that story
Mm-hmm.
to consumers who are predominantly in luxury hospitality,
Okay.
for them to come in and for them to enjoy that product in that luxury space with all of the other things that luxury hospitality offer.
Okay.
Because if you walk into a, place like, well, you take any luxury hotel,
Hmm.
they will offer luxury at every level.
Oh yes,
But
absolutely.
many hotels still
Hmm.
will look at their tea,
Hmm.
and although tea will be drunk all the way through their business,
Hmm.
they don't take it seriously enough. So they will offer, luxury. I've seen luxury hotels offer the same brand of tea that is being offered
At
by
Tesco.
a budget hotel.
Okay.
And I always tell them, if I go and sleep on one of your beds, do you buy luxury beds? Yeah. Do you have, this type of thread count on your cotton?
Mm-hmm.
And they'll tell me all the cool stuff they have in their bedroom. And I look at their
Tea.
tea offering, and it's the same tea offering that a budget hotel will offer.
Okay.
Some of these hotels are charging £300 a night,
Uh-huh.
and you can get the budget hotel for £30. Yet the thing that they have in common is their tea that they use. Right?
Yeah.
So that's what
Absolutely.
Empire State of Tea is about.
Uh-huh.
It's about taking the old with the people and putting it into that luxury space,
Okay.
so that everything in that luxury space flows.
Okay.
And the minute you walk in through the door,
Mm-hmm.
those small touch points of the tea in your bedroom to the other products that you have around the hotel, everything flows at the same level.
All right. So like being at like adding the block of luxury as well to the already luxurious thing.
Of course, yeah.
All right. So would you also tell how you have taken the Sri Lankan tea to the global shelves of UK and elsewhere?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you look at Sri Lanka today, we're a major tea producer in the world. And like I was
Just a quick thing, okay? You just to add it on over here as well. You said Sri Lanka is the fourth largest producer, but the second largest exporter, and not India. Why?
So India is a huge producer. I think
Hmm.
it's the world's second largest, after China.
Hmm.
But the difference that you have in India is that you have a huge population, unlike for us.
Hmm.
So if you put it into context, Sri Lanka has what, just over 20 million people.
Uh-huh.
And I had a good friend of mine who visited me in Sri Lanka many years ago. We were leaving Colombo on a Friday, and we were stuck in traffic. And I remember he was on his phone. He was on the old BlackBerry at the time.
Uh-huh.
And I said, Manu, I'm so sorry about the traffic. Once we clear this bit, we'll be out of it. We'll get moving. And I remember he looked up from his BlackBerry and he said, what traffic? And I said, this traffic. And he'd come from Delhi to see me. And he was like, you have 20 million people in your country. We have 20 million people in Delhi.
Delhi. Yeah,
right?
exactly.
You come to Delhi and then you'll understand what traffic
What traffic means.
is.
Exactly.
And through that, you'll also understand why we're such a large exporter,
Uh,
because we're the fourth largest producer of tea. But I mean, the reason why India is not a large exporter of tea is because it consumes so much tea within home market.
yeah.
Your home market is so huge that
Yeah.
the whole size of Sri Lanka is just the size of Delhi.
I don't know about that in terms, but yeah, I get what you're
So
saying.
this is why a lot of India's tea is consumed within the home
Within
market.
the-
Many people in India drink that tea,
Yeah.
and there isn't.
And that's why India is a tea drinking country.
Yes,
Yeah.
it doesn't have the sort of the excess to export, because it's got so much inner demand to deal with.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
So this is why with Sri Lanka we don't have that much of a population. We produce a lot of tea.
Hmm.
We have always been export orientated.
Yeah. Now coming back to how Sri Lanka to global shelves.
So coming to global shelves, very much. I mean, our whole focus has been to storytell,
Mhm.
right the way through, so that a consumer understands where their tea is from. And one of the ways that we have sort of done this is, of course, if we take the luxury hospitality side of things, we've always put on menus. But I think one of the things that have really sort of helped propel that and push that journey along is what we did with the Rubens Hotel back in 2019, and we still do it today, where we sell a pot of tea for £500 a pot. And this really kind of, made people
500 pounds is somewhere around 55,000 rupees today.
Indian rupees, that
Yeah.
is. Yeah, Indian
Sorry.
rupees, not
Yeah.
Sri Lankan.
How much in Sri Lankan rupees?
So in Sri Lankan rupees, I think it's about 125, 1 lakh. I think it's probably maybe about 4 lakhs or so. You know,
All right.
4 lakhs. So I mean that really changed. I think maybe people in Sri Lanka's perception about tea, and also changed a lot of people's perception about Sri Lankan tea,
Mhm.
because we look at,
No, it leave the perspective. It is quality, like no doubt about it. Yeah, please continue.
you
Yeah.
know it changed that, and it sort of, I think, that's probably made other Sri Lankan exporters also look at value adding,
Hmm.
because I mean, and we'll get onto this further down the podcast about challenges that we face.
Hmm.
So that is probably one of the biggest things that we've done in terms of changing that perspective of of bringing Sri Lankan tea to global shelves.
Hmm. Hmm.
And for consumers to sort of work out that Sri Lanka doesn't just do black tea,
Okay.
and the varieties of black tea that are even there, even when we do black tea.
Hmm. Hmm.
That's probably one of the biggest things that we have done to change that perspective, because that's a a press piece that went global.
Okay.
So I had friends from all over the world, and like headlines, friends messaging me going, "Hey, this news story is in our country."
Okay. Hmm.
From South Africa to
Hmm.
parts of Eastern Europe to wherever. I mean, we sat down with New Zealand, with New Zealand TV as well for it.
Okay.
So it was a piece that went global, which really sort of made people think about tea.
Look at you, at least.
Yeah, look at
Yeah.
us,
Hmm.
think about tea, and also change the perspective
Hmm.
of what Sri Lanka tea is.
Okay. And in all of this, how do you blend? So tea is something, at least in England, is something very traditional, right? So we'll come back to another question about traditional as well. So how do you blend right now in businesses? Right now, the time is changing. Even though you want to keep traditional, keep the quality, taking out the tip and keeping it everywhere, how do you still manage to keep the innovation and efficiency with tradition at the moment in your business?
So how do we keep innovation and efficiency through our business? That's a really good question. So I think in terms of the innovation part, it's it goes back to that storytelling piece.
Hmm.
How do we storytell?
Hmm.
How do we storytell that piece? How do we look
Hmm.
at uh, at at sort of how do we look at storytelling? That's where we've used a lot of technology. So in many ways, back in the day, you had to go to Sri Lanka.
Mm-hmm.
You had to go to Sri Lanka. You had to visit a tea estate.
Okay.
Now, through video, through the internet, we've been able to bring that to you.
Mm-hmm.
The other way is that if you're visiting, let's say, luxury hospitality,
Hmm.
many of the hotels we work with have QR codes.
Okay.
You're able to QR code and see a video of where that specific tea comes from.
Okay.
And you're able to go down that rabbit chain of how it's brewed, the elevation, why it changes to the next one. So you're able to explore
Hmm.
far more within the within the tea menu.
Hmm.
You
Hmm.
know, that's one of the ways that we've used innovation. Your other part that you asked was what? It was
Um.
about innovation and,
Yeah, innovation. How are you managing
yeah,
with the other part will be about
efficiency.
no efficiency and innovation,
Yeah.
and the other part will be about how are you mixing the tea with other modern things. I'll come to that.
So to touch on
Mhm.
the efficiency, I
Uh-huh.
mean, any business needs efficiency.
Of course, yeah.
When you're efficient, when you're centered, that's when you and your business can really hit a flow state.
Mm-hmm.
That's
Mm-hmm.
when you can really hit a flow state, and you can really perform at your very best. So in terms of our efficiency, we are constantly thinking about efficiency right through our business.
Mm-hmm.
From how do we receive a tea, how do we pack a tea, what is the optimum way of packaging that product, even down, Siddharaj, to the size of our boxes. So you talk about efficiency last year
Mm-hmm.
with shipping prices going up due to what's,
Tariffs.
yeah, not so much due to tariffs, but what the incident that happened
Evergreen.
in the Red Sea. Yeah, Evergreen was one of them, but also the Houthi issue that's happened in
Oh,
the Red Sea.
okay, okay, okay.
You're having to have ships go all the way around
Hmm.
the coast of South Africa, so you're having a
Yeah.
longer lead time.
Oh, yeah.
Having a longer lead time, your shipping rates have also gone up. So it made us look at, let's say, our tea bag product that we pack in Sri Lanka. We value add all of our product in Sri Lanka because we don't look at it like For so long, Sri Lanka or many parts of the
Hmm.
world have made the bulk,
Hmm.
and they've shipped it somewhere else, and value adding happens somewhere else.
Hmm.
We, if we are growing a tea bush for 7 years, if
Hmm.
we're taking all this time to make tea,
Hmm.
why should we not package and value add in Sri Lanka? Why not?
Okay.
So that's very much a part of our business where we look
Hmm.
at at doing that there. When we were doing that, we looked at for 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 hospitality businesses, we would provide our envelope tea bags for housekeeping, for conferencing, in boxes of 100. Boxes of 100, they would come, and we looked at it and we thought, look, in a in that box of 100, we'd put 10 of those. So in one outer carton that was a standard size, we would ship 1,000. So we looked at the cost of shipping, and we realized that for a 20-foot container, we can only ship 360 boxes, large outer carton boxes, which is 3,600 small ones. Times that by 100, you've got your tea bags. We worked out that actually, if we could pack more into this box for certain varieties of tea. And so something like our breakfast tea, due to the size of the tea leaf, we were able to pack 150 tea bags into that same box.
Okay.
So that was one area that we brought efficiency in. But then when we went down that chain, we thought, actually, why do we just need to pack 150 of the breakfast tea? Maybe for the chamomile, it'll be 110. We were actually able to, when we looked at shipping, we thought, why not actually pack the tea bag itself into the outer carton and finally pack those 100 boxes here in the UK and finish it here, because we can maximize our shipping space
Okay.
because of the cost of shipping. So
Hmm.
efficiency is something that should sit on the forefront of anybody's business. And a great book, actually, if anyone wants to understand efficiency, is to read the book The Toyota Way.
The
It's
Toyota way.
The Toyota Way.
Oh.
It's been a game changing book for me and for many other people. If you want to learn efficiency, read The Toyota Way, because it makes you think about how you can streamline your business. Everyone will face business challenges. Costs of things will go up all the time.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're able to have efficiency,
Hmm.
that's when you will be in that flow state, and your business will be flowing.
Now, one of the main important questions for all the businesses, right? Why are you doing what you're doing? What's the why of your business? Why do you want that quality? Why do you want that packing? Why do you want, like, people to have good tea? What's your reasoning behind it?
Yeah. So why am I doing what I'm doing? I think it's a very simple thing. I think it's a very, very simple thing. Why am I doing what I'm doing? I love tea.
Hmm.
I mean, the root cause of the why is love. Do I love tea? Yes.
Hmm.
Do I love, uh, uh, you know, do I love the environment in which it's grown in? Yes. Do I love the joy that, tea brings to people when they have a problem, they drink tea, when they're with family, they drink tea. Some of those big moments in life
Mm-hmm.
are around tea, you
Mm-hmm.
know?
Yeah, yeah.
Do I love the fact that, I get to talk about Sri Lanka, that I'm, you know, a country that I love? Yeah.
Yeah.
And do I love to be able to take my family business, forward? And do I love the fact that we're able to have the impact and not just the impact, but do I love the fact that we're able to do what we can do? Yeah, that's the reason for the why.
Hmm.
The root of it is love,
Yeah.
you know.
Okay.
And when you love something, you'll go through anything.
So
You'll
that's the passion. You
that
wanna make sure people around the world have good quality tea.
yeah, good quality tea, but so that you know why do I want them to have good quality tea? Because number one, life is too short to have bad quality tea.
Okay.
And in the few moments that you can have tea in your day,
Uh-huh.
you should certainly have a good tea. You should
Uh,
certainly unwind. You should certainly take some time.
yeah.
You're running around like a dog chasing its tail half the time in your life, right? But sometimes you need to sit and just experience things like this.
You're regretting not drinking tea over here.
I'm regretting not bringing some tea today, right? For us
Yeah.
to sit and have,
Yeah.
as we're sort of having this chat.
Hmm.
That's why.
Hmm.
That's why it's love. It's a love for all of those things that manifests itself in PMD Tea. You know.
Hmm. Now to put forward all of this what you have said, what's the concept of University of Tea and the buyers club you have within PMDT?
So I'll talk about University of Tea first.
Mm-hmm.
So University of Tea is a concept that came about
Mm-hmm.
because we started to work with a hotel company,
Mm-hmm.
and they were very keen. They wanted to start with just one hotel,
Mm-hmm.
and they were very keen. And the food and beverage manager said to me, "I really like everything. Everything is good, but I need you to change the pricing for me."
Mm-hmm.
And I said, "Okay, why?" And he said, "Because I need a deal." I
Okay.
said, "Okay, fine. I'll
Hmm.
tell you what I'll do.
Hmm.
If you take my teas
Mm-hmm.
for this 1 year
Mm-hmm.
at the prices that I'm offering, you take it for a year. At the end of that year, I will take you to Sri Lanka,
Hmm.
and I will let you go and see how we grow our tea, what we do, and how we do everything.
Hmm.
And if you feel that you still want the tea for cheaper,
Mm-hmm.
right? You tell the workers that you should pay them less for their tea. You tell the workers you should pay them less for their tea."
Hmm.
So he said, "Done." And I
Okay.
also said to him, "And if you want that for cheaper, whatever that, let's say, argument's sake, you want it for 10, but like I'm giving it to you at £10, you want it at £8, that £2 difference that you've made over the whole year, I will refund that back to you,
Mm-hmm.
even after you have told the workers, you know, I think your tea needs to be sold for cheaper."
Okay. Mm-hmm.
He took us up on the idea,
Hmm.
and he came.
Hmm.
And we brought some other people as well
Hmm. In Colombo.
into Colombo,
Mm-hmm.
up to the estates,
Mm-hmm.
to do the job that a tea worker will do, to touch soil, to mix soil, to make your own cuttings, to plant those teas up at 4.5, 5,000 feet above elevation.
And
To,
what's the temperature?
so the temperature at that time is about 23, 24 degrees
Oh, still
Celsius,
manageable.
right? Still manageable.
Yeah.
Walking at elevation, carrying, tea on their shoulder, like
Mm.
actual tea plants, digging a hole,
Hmm.
planting it, doing that one after the other, plucking tea, following that tea to the factory at night, you know, seeing their tea made, tasting it in the morning. The whole point of University of Tea, and it still goes on today,
Hmm.
is for people to come behind the teacup, to understand from a grassroots level
And what's the
the
interesting
effort
story?
that goes into making a cup of tea.
Hmm.
And I remember that first year we did it,
Hmm.
when we took the guys off the estate,
Mm-hmm.
they turned around and they said,
Hmm.
the next time someone in my hotel
Hmm.
asks me for just a cup of tea, I'm going to tell them it's not just a cup of tea, you know? And that's where University of Tea came from. We're just about to run another University of Tea.
Mm-hmm.
We're just about to run another University of Tea where we're about to have a whole load of people come through later on this year.
Mm-hmm.
So it's aimed at hospitality professionals
Mm-hmm.
to come to understand where their tea comes from, for them to be trained as well, for them to understand when they're putting a menu together,
Mm-hmm.
how to put it together, what makes one tea estate different to the other one. Because when you go to the Raj, like for example, I remember there was one year we were doing University of Tea. We were in an area of Sri Lanka known as Nuwara, very, very high up, about 6,000 feet of elevation. We woke up in the morning, it's misty, it's raining.
Mm-hmm.
So everyone is in a rain jacket. We drive about 15 minutes down into the province of Dimulla, and we go to a town known as Nanoya. Within a 10-minute drive,
Mm-hmm.
the entire temperature changed. The skies were blue. The temperature was, increased, drastically. Everyone was in jumpers. They took the jumpers off. And, but until you see that, and until we can say, look, in Norelia, when you're tasting Lover's Leap tea today, when you're making Lover's Leap tea, this climate will have an effect on the taste of your tea.
Of course.
And when you drive down 10 minutes, come down in elevation, the skies are blue, you're on a different plane, the wind is blowing in a different way,
Mm-hmm.
that will have a different effect on your tea.
Yes.
All of that plays a part in how your tea tastes. All of it.
Yeah.
All of it has a part in how your tea tastes.
So true. And to add up to that point, India's tea will taste differently because of the alluvial soils and the Himalayas and the Brahmaputra river,
Absolutely.
and to Sri Lanka's tea.
Not only to Sri Lanka's tea estate, if you were to visit a tea estate in let's say Assam, right? One tea estate in Assam will not taste the same as the next tea estate.
True. So true. So
You know?
true. Yeah.
You don't even need to go from Assam to Darjeeling, from Darjeeling to Nilgiri to see the difference.
Darjeeling, Assam, and Nilgiri Hills are three main producers of India of tea in India. Yeah.
You don't need to go that far.
Mhm.
The tea you grow on this side will be different to the tea that you grow on this side.
That side, yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And why? Like, here the sun is going down. On that side there, the sun is still there.
Hmm.
All these small things, the water, the wind, the elevation, the tea plant,
Mhm.
all that will have an effect on how
All
your
right.
tea tastes.
That's
So
interesting.
that's where University of Tea came from, for people to understand that.
The Buyers Club.
The Buyers Club came.
Hmm.
So the University of Tea was more for our B2B customers. The PMD Tea Buyers Club, the YouTube channel, came about because so many people, like if you take the UK market,
Hmm.
we today buy packaging. We buy
Packaged tea.
packaging.
Hmm.
We don't buy, because we buy tea bags. The vast majority of the market here is tea bags. So when you buy a tea bag,
Just to tell you that my father didn't like the tea bags.
he didn't like tea bags. He
Yeah,
said,
I took it back for him to give it a try for a strong tea, and he
"Yeah,
was like, "Hey, this
not
isn't good. That's wrong." I
yeah."
was like, "Okay."
He's a loose leaf man, is he?
Yeah, the powder.
Yeah, he's a
Mhm.
man of quality, then, isn't he?
Mhm.
Right? So many people in the UK market, they only drink tea bags.
Mhm.
So as a result of it, unlike our grandparents' generation who drank loose leaf tea, they know what good tea is. They would know how to inspect tea. They would know how to just looking at the dry leaf, they would know if it's a good tea or not.
Mhm.
Today, you're not buying tea, you're buying packaging. So as a
Mhm.
result, the PMD Tea Buyers Club came about
Mhm.
so that people were able to understand, first of all, what is tea, the four different types of tea, and when you're buying tea, if you're buying loose leaf, what are the things that you should be looking at when you are buying tea?
Hmm.
So if you're looking at the dry leaf, what should the dry leaf look like? Should it be black? What does, if it looks gray, why is that? If it looks open and flaky, what does that look like? If it's a good twisted tea, what does that look like?
Mhm.
How does that look in the infusion? In the how does it look in the infused leaf?
Mhm.
How does it look in the cup? What are the small things
Hmm.
that we're looking for? Does it have a golden rim?
Mhm.
Does the cup go cloudy?
Hmm.
That's what the PMD Tea Buyers Club was for.
Hmm.
It's
Mhm.
for people who are buying tea
Hmm.
anywhere in the world,
Mhm.
for them to understand
Hmm.
how to buy a good cup of tea.
Okay.
Because many people will tell you we do the best tea.
Okay.
And what I'm saying is,
Come
first
see
know
how
how
we.
to buy tea,
Okay.
then you go and judge teas from all around the world. You
Okay.
know,
Okay.
that's what the PMD Tea Buyers Club is about. It's about, first you learn how to judge tea, then you see what other people are saying.
Tea lovers, tea enthusiasts, tea passionate people. This is where you can check it out for if you want to give it a shot.
So you can check it out there. But actually, one thing we're doing now
Hmm.
is we're actually opening up our space in Colombo.
Okay.
In our office that we've been in from
Oh yeah, the
1969.
office is excellent, very excellent. I'll
So
put some pictures here when they see. Yeah.
put some pictures up. So anyone who's visiting Colombo
Mhm.
who wants to learn about tea,
Mhm.
they can come and they can do a tea experience with us, which
Mhm.
is anywhere between an hour to 2 hours,
Mhm.
where we'll take you through 50 different cups of tea. You'll be with the tea master.
Mhm.
It'll be guided, so you'll do it in the professional manner in which we do it,
Mhm.
and you'll get to understand what is tea, what is good tea, how does elevation change, why seasons change tea,
Mhm.
why tea plants change the flavor of a tea. You'll be able to go through that whole process in Colombo. So if you're visiting Colombo, please come and see us.
Sure. Now, since you have added to that changes and everything and this and that, what are the challenges? Firstly, in terms of climate, okay, what affects your business overall in terms of, because you are in somewhere or the other in agriculture.
Yes.
Yes, that's one thing. Second thing is about the import export policies. Two things first, and then I'll come to the younger generation involvement question. But please, first about the challenge you deal with climates, how you deal it, how you have overcome it as well.
So climate is a very, very interesting one. And it's something that is changing all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So let me give you an example to sort of begin with.
Mm-hmm.
When I was a child and I used to visit tea estates, I used to ask tea planters,
Mm-hmm.
why is Sri Lanka tea so good? And
Mm-hmm.
they would say, look, Sri Lanka tea is so good because we have a perfect climate for it.
Okay.
We have, dry days, bright sunny days,
Mm-hmm.
showers in the evening,
Hmm.
and
Oh, you are
cold
more
nights.
closer to the equator. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. Mm-hmm.
cold nights,
Mm-hmm.
perfect tea growing conditions.
Okay.
Today, if you look at Sri Lanka, and you take its climate, the amount of rainfall that is happening in a month is still the same. But when you delve into the data, that volume of rain is now falling in a far shorter space of time.
Okay.
So what would fall over 30 days is now falling at one shot in 72 hours. As a
Hmm.
result, you're seeing landslips happening
Oh.
in the country because
Oh.
all of our tea grows at elevation and it grows on
Yeah.
slope. So
Hmm.
the land can't take that volume of water hitting in
Hmm.
such a short space of time.
Yes,
So that's
absolutely.
something that has changed drastically in the last few years.
Hmm.
It is, you cannot deny, the temperatures in the country have also risen. The periods in which you have water and don't have water have also drastically increased. So traditionally in Sri Lanka, in the months of January,
Mhm.
we would have from December onwards, you'd start to get a drought. In third week of Jan, you'd get the wind that would pick up, and with that drought and that wind, you'd start to make quality teas on the western side of the island.
Mhm.
Same thing for the eastern side around July, August.
Mhm.
Now, sometimes we're seeing seasons skip, those perfect weather conditions of wind, of rain, not happening or not coming about.
Mhm.
So those are some of those are some of the climatic changes that we're seeing.
Okay.
How do we as a business, prevent for that? We're dealing with an agricultural product, Siddharaj. So like I think it really affects us the most when we have seasonal teas, and this is something that really really gets me, right? So we have seasonal teas. Let's say from the uva season,
Mhm.
when we have seasonal teas, trying to get seasonal teas
Mhm.
is what we find really difficult.
Mhm.
So we in having stock control is very tough because we don't know if the season's going to come this year, and if it's a good year, how much tea to buy, because
Mhm.
next year the season might not come.
Mhm.
So in some ways, we've actually started to stop. We've stopped trying to be perfect in many ways, and actually started to look at it and say, look, if you're lucky enough to buy seasonal tea, here you are.
Mhm.
If you miss it this year, it's gone. It's finished, right?
Mm. Using it to your advantage.
I mean, because it's the truth, isn't it? If you want to buy seasonal tea,
I mean, it's not like you're doing something, you're
which
holding it. It's
when
happening.
it's happening, right?
Yeah.
So we don't know how much to buy. We don't know. Look, if there's a certain amount that we'll buy,
Hmm.
what our data shows. But if our data changes and someone comes in and says, look, I want to buy 60% of it,
3 trillion tons. No.
off we go. We'll sell that seasonal stock to them.
Yeah.
So climate is a big factor.
Hmm.
It's a big problem.
Hmm.
In fact, in Sri Lanka, they've been doing trials for a long time in looking at tea varieties that are far more resistant to temperature, because 55% of Sri Lanka's tea is grown in the southern part of the country. These are small producers like you and I who have half an acre, maybe less than half an acre of land with a little bit of tea. The temperatures in southern Sri Lanka are close to 30, right?
Hmm.
When you get above, I think it's about 35, 36, I'm not entirely sure, a tea bush will stop photosynthesizing.
Okay.
So if our temperatures continue to rise, you will southern tea will stop growing, and 55% of our country's production will drop. You know, so the Tea Research Institute is already developing varieties of tea that are far more resistant, not resistant, but cope better in higher temperatures.
Hmm.
So if in the future that the temperature in southern Sri Lanka goes, let's say for argument's sake, to 40 degrees Celsius, what tea plants will survive that? What tea plants will still be able to produce tea? Those are some of the things that the Tea Research Institute are working on, because climate is a huge factor in what we do.
Okay.
Um,
And yeah, or how about now, since you have gone from Sri Lanka to global shelves, how does the import export policies affect you?
so import export policies, I mean, obviously it's in the news because of Trump and his tariffs. Usually import export policies haven't, certainly in the last few years, they haven't been what has affected much of Sri Lanka and what we do. What has affected has been shipping.
Okay.
So shipping in the last few years has been very volatile. So to
Okay.
give you an idea, during COVID-19, shipping rates went through the roof. Many people don't realize this, but shipping rates during COVID went through the roof, because in anyone's income,
Hmm.
any part of the world, they'll spend a certain amount of it on services, a certain amount of it on goods. But when you send an entire population home,
Hmm.
and they've only got goods to buy, those goods need to be shipped from, in the vast majority of cases, from Southeast Asia.
Hmm.
So shipping rates went through the roof at that period. They then came down. Again, last year they went up again because of issues in the Red Sea, with Suez being shut. So those are some of the biggest challenges that we've had.
Hmm. Hmm.
The cost of shipping,
Hmm.
getting containers, and bringing in product. It
Hmm.
hasn't so much been in the issue of tariffs, which is obviously something that has happened now with the U.S. And yes, how the chips have now been thrown up in the air. I think it's still very early days to see where they all settle and what kind of happens. But the biggest problem for us as a business certainly has been shipping,
Shipping.
shipping, 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 and cost of shipping.
Any shipping company or anything, any business person looking into this, this is your opportunity to disrupt the market.
So shipping has been
Mhm.
has been an issue.
Mhm.
Shipping prices haven't always been high.
Mhm.
So if I look at 2023,
Mhm.
you know,
Mhm.
shipping prices, came down a fair bit, and then they shot back up as well.
Okay.
So you've just got to ride the wave. No pun intended.
No. So now this is a bit of sub business where you're working along. So in the fields and everything, do you have a problem sourcing employees, and what's the involvement of the younger generation in this?
So that's a really good question.
You don't have someone at the moment.
No, not
Yeah.
myself.
Uh-huh.
I think you're referring to
Yeah.
any children. No.
Yeah.
But in terms of bringing people into the tea industry, so if you start on the agriculture side, if you start on the agriculture side of things,
Mm-hmm.
many people are reluctant to work in the tea sector,
Mm-hmm.
starting from the growing side. Why?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's not an easy job.
Mm-hmm.
It's not an easy job. You wake up early, you walk to the fields, you're doing manual labor, right? You're picking tea, you're digging holes, or you're supervising that in the hot sun. You then make tea at night.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look on the management side of things,
Mm-hmm.
you take an 18-year-old who joins a tea plantation to be a tea planter,
And who has been connected to the internet and YouTube and everything.
precisely,
Yeah.
whose friends are in cities, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So on Friday night, if you're a young tea planter, you are in a bungalow in the middle of nowhere. You are managing tea plants and people and the environment. That's what a planter does, right? Your friends are sending you WhatsApp pictures
Or snaps,
or snaps, or
whatever.
of them in nightclubs,
Yeah.
of them going to the beach,
Hmm.
of them having drinks. Here you are sitting in the remote plantation,
Picking up leaves.
picking leaves and dealing with problems. So
Uh-huh.
when, if someone's house sets on fire, that becomes your problem, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
All of these things that are happening, they become your problem, right? So it takes a certain type of individual to come into planting. Very hard to find today. So if you look at the 1960s, people were clamoring to get into the tea industry. You know, they were clamoring to get into the tea industry and find something in tea. And this is the same thing right across the tea value chain, because even if you look at the Colombo jobs, many people don't want to come into tea because it doesn't have that sexiness to it, right? People,
Glamour.
it's
The coolness, which we say.
yeah, it's the coolness, right? So like, I mean, certainly when the tea auctions were happening, there was a certain attire you had to turn up in to walk into the Colombo tea auction.
Hmm.
If you want to wear jeans and flip flops and come in a t-shirt and work off a bean bag, tea is not the industry for you, right? So it makes it very hard to recruit for the younger generation.
Hmm.
Um,
So you're facing the problem as there over there.
absolutely, yeah.
I personally think you don't have an attrition problem. You know what's the attrition rate, right?
Tell me.
Attrition rate is where employees coming in
Oh
and
yeah, yeah.
leaving the
No,
second day. No.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess, but I think the problem that we have is finding the right employees for our business.
Okay.
So I mean, to give you an example, just a few months ago,
Hmm.
we recruited a chap to join our business. He lasted about a week and said he can't do it. Just can't do the job, because we're looking for quality. We're looking for a certain spirit in the people that we want to join our business.
Hmm. Hmm.
And finding that spirit
Hmm.
is very tough.
Hmm.
So attrition rate, no, but getting the right person to come in, very tough.
So
As is for any business,
Okay.
to be fair.
Okay.
It's just not just us thing or an industry thing,
Mhm.
as it is for any business. If you look at the hospitality industry,
Yeah.
people will tell you the same thing,
Yeah.
right? People don't come to work, they're
Hmm.
not the right caliber, they're not this, they're not that.
Hmm.
These are challenges that we have now and that our forefathers had before. We're
Hmm.
just dealing with it now, so we think it's an us thing.
Okay.
It's not an us thing.
Hmm.
Something that's happened all the time.
Now coming to the younger generation point, now I just was reading an article about Gen Alpha
Yeah.
coming into the picture slowly. Now Gen Z will, and I am a zillennial, I consider myself a zillennial. I can connect to the millennial people and the Gen Z people as well at the
Yeah.
same time. Gen Z is totally different for me, like not exactly different, but some parts are different. And Gen Alpha is skibidi dibidi whatever it is. I am still yet to understand about this segment as a marketeer. So those people coming into the picture, you might know from the studies and data and the research, Gen Z is getting away from alcohol. All right, they are more into healthy stuff and stuff, things like that. I am yet to understand that behavior as well.
Mm-hmm.
I saw a few videos on your YouTube and around your business. You are going ahead with tea mocktails, tea cocktails, and everything like that. Explaining those as well, how do you think you will be catering the Gen Z market or other things? Or
So I
what
think,
have you brought something new for them?
yeah, so I think if you look at this new generation and
Hmm.
you talk about the no alcohol thing,
Hmm.
that's a really interesting debate.
Hmm.
Because if you walk into many bars today, the number of zero alcohol beers,
Hmm.
zero alcohol wine, spirits, whatever, has gone up.
Hmm. Hmm. So true.
If you take a company like Guinness,
Hmm.
Guinness have outgrown their Guinness Zero sales.
Hmm.
Like
Hmm.
their production facility has had to increase again,
Hmm.
right? So it's been very, very popular.
Hmm.
I think where, you know, where tea sits and where we kind of fit that kind of generation is, if you look at whiskey as an industry in the last sort of 10, 15, 20 years, it has blown up. Why? People want to know the stories behind whiskey, especially behind Scotch whiskey. But if you have a generation now that still wants those stories, still wants that difference, still wants that variety, how do they learn that? How do they get that? They can get those similar stories through tea. Why? Because unlike whiskey, with zero alcohol, we can still offer you those same stories. You don't need to have a lot of equipment, you know, to enjoy something. You can, you don't need to, you can make your own tea.
Yeah.
You can make your own tea.
Hmm.
You can enjoy it in places like in hospitality. You can first discover it there, but you can also take it home and you can discover further, you know. And I think with tea, the difference is that unlike with other beverage products, you can put your own twist. So,
Hmm.
for example, you and I can have the same tea. I can brew mine for 4 minutes. You can brew yours for 3 minutes. You might want to have yours with honey. I might like to have mine plain. You might want to put it with milk. We can still put our own stamp on something. And people, I think, in this generation are all about having a bit of heritage, but also putting their own thing to it.
Hmm.
And you can do that with tea where you can't do it with other things.
True.
You
True.
know, there's a way that that someone will tell you to enjoy it.
Hmm.
You don't need to do that with tea.
Hmm.
I think where we've been doing tea cocktails and mocktails, it's a different way to enjoy that traditional product.
Hmm.
It's combining other things, It's changing it in a setting. It's not just in a tea room out of a pot in porcelain.
Mm-hmm.
You can have it in a trendy bar.
Okay.
You can have it in a trendy bar. You can still enjoy yourself, but you can still get up at 6 in the morning, no hangover, and go
Mm-hmm.
for a run,
Yeah. True.
right?
True.
And you
Mm-hmm.
can still be present and enjoy all of this
Hmm.
without having the hangover.
So how did you get into the ideas of tea mocktails and tea cocktails anyway?
So I think a large part of that was
Hmm.
due to who's a very good friend now.
Hmm.
Was due to a bartender called Angelo Logreco,
Mm-hmm.
who works in the Milestone Hotel
Mm-hmm.
at the Stables Bar. So if you're ever in London,
Mm-hmm.
please go visit him. He's a great guy, and his team are amazing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he was very innovative,
Mm-hmm.
and he came to a tea training session,
Mm-hmm.
and he had experimented with trying this with that,
Mm-hmm.
and it was actually him who sort of came up with this concept
Mm-hmm.
of doing tea cocktails and having them on the menu, and that's kind of grown to other things,
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So it very much, I think, a lot of credit probably doesn't have to be with me,
Mm-hmm.
probably has to be with
Mm-hmm.
Angelo and his mixing and his mixology skills more
Okay.
than anything else.
Now, just to add one luxury layer on tea, you had talked about in one of the podcasts which you have given about the London auction.
Yes.
What does exactly London option is, and what are other such interesting things related to that thing?
So you mean the London Tea Auction,
Yeah.
is it? The London Tea Auction is something that used to happen. It hasn't happened since 1998. That's when the last London Tea Auction happened. I think what you're referring to, Siddharaj, is actually the London Tea Walk that we do, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
So we do a London Tea Walk, which is again another. It's an experience for people who want to know about tea that we
Mm-hmm.
run in London
Mm-hmm.
with the Milestone Hotel again. Actually, incidentally,
Mm-hmm.
that is where we take you around London and we show you the old sites. One of those sites is where the London Tea Auction is. So London is a very interesting city because 85% of the world's tea came through London, which is an amazing fact because London has zero tea growing in it and England has zero tea growing in it. Yet 85% of the world's tea came here. So we take you to the old sites, teach you about that history, teach you about, a lot of world history in that, India's history, China's history, British history, and we take you to many of those sites. So the
Mm-hmm.
London auction used to happen weekly, stopped in 1998 because those auctions still happen, but they now sit in Calcutta.
Mm-hmm.
They're in Colombo, they're in Mombasa. They've gone to the producer nations. Whereas years ago, the producer nations would make tea, ship it in bulk, it would come to London, it would be auctioned, and then it would go around the world. Now it's auctioned in those countries,
Mm-hmm.
like in Colombo, like in Calcutta, like in Mombasa, and then it's sent to various parts of the world. So the auction still happens,
Mm-hmm.
it just doesn't sit here in London.
What are other such bits like London auction happening around in the tea thing?
You mean on the tea walk, is it?
Yeah, in the tea landscape. In the tea landscape, there is one thing called as London auction.
Yes.
What are other such interesting things in the tea landscape?
In terms of auctions, are you
Not
referring to?
auctions, any other events or interesting
Oh, right.
get-togethers or something
Get-togethers.
around those lines?
So one of the big ones is the World Tea Expo that
Uh-huh.
happens in Las Vegas,
Okay.
usually in March.
Mm-hmm.
The in Sri Lanka we tend to do
Mm-hmm.
a sort of meetup almost every 2-3 years. It happens.
Mm-hmm.
Usually happens in Colombo where the world's tea trade gather.
Mm-hmm.
The other kind of meetup for the trade. This is the tea dinner that takes place in London
Mm-hmm.
at the Savoy Hotel where it's kind of sat for many years.
Mm-hmm.
So those are some of the ones, but they're very much tea trade related. So if you're in the tea trade, those are the things that happen.
But from someone as a let's say I like tea.
As a
What do you?
consumer,
Hmm.
now that's a really interesting one. There isn't a lot
Hmm.
happening for the consumer. There are small tea festivals that are happening.
PMD Tea has a scope in there, yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. I was actually speaking to a friend of mine about something similar to this, but for the consumer,
Mm-hmm.
there isn't a lot there.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that the tea trade is to blame for that.
Mm-hmm.
The tea trade have kept. This is why we opened up Tea Buyers Club.
Mm-hmm.
The tea trade have kept tea as a skill for them.
Hmm.
So they don't open up tasting rooms. They'll give you the product and say, "Here, you drink this." You know,
Hmm.
we haven't let the consumer come in and see what we do, understand what we do. We've kept it to a very elite group of people
Mm-hmm.
in the tea industry,
Hmm.
and that's why there aren't as many events like that.
Okay. Okay. We'll see you have a scope in that. A little bit one deeper water and one last question and we would be done.
Done.
So I am a history buff. We touched that question where I have studied India's history, Sri Lanka's history, British history, African history. One of the history's turning points or a thing which was going on during Cold War was Tamil Tigers thing. How
Yep.
did your business personally deal with the Tamil Tigers conflict overall? How did your elderly people deal with it, and how did you manage all of that?
So that's a really interesting question, Siddharaj.
Mhm.
How did we as a business,
Mhm.
deal with that?
Mhm.
So to give a bit of context, we had a civil war in Sri Lanka.
Mhm.
We had a civil war in Sri Lanka that raged on for 30 years.
Mhm.
Started in sort of, early 80s,
Mhm.
finished in 2009.
Mhm.
A bloody and brutal civil war that affected the lives of everyone in the country, including, our neighbors to the north in India.
Mhm.
We had Indian peacekeeping force, IPKF, that
Mhm.
came in the late 80s, early 90s,
Mhm.
and many, Indian soldiers lost their lives in Sri Lanka. So this was very much something that has affected Sri Lanka post in its post-colonial history.
Hmm. Hmm.
How has it affected our business, and how has it affected the tea industry?
Hmm.
Well, the Tamil Tigers, were famous for carrying cyanide capsules around their neck. So if they were ever captured, they'd bite into a cyanide capsule and they would commit suicide. And they put out a story that they were lacing Sri Lankan tea with cyanide, and that the world should stop buying Sri Lankan tea because they wanted to hurt the economy.
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
So the way that it works in Sri Lanka is that a tea is made on a tea estate. A sample of that tea that is made today is sent to the tea brokers, and there are 8 different tea brokers. And a sample is sent. A tea broker will taste that tea, and they will catalog it, and they will put that into the tea auction. So from when a tea is made and it going into auction, there's a 3-week lag. So a tea broker has to taste this tea before it goes into the auction. So if I'm your broker, I have to taste that tea, provide you feedback, and give you a valuation on that tea. If you're a tea broker and you have a press piece that says Sri Lanka tea is laced with cyanide, you don't know if the tea that you're tasting has cyanide in it or not. How can you test for it,
Exactly.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
How can you test for it? You're doing 6 million kilos of tea a week through the auction. Can
Hmm.
you test 6 million kilos of tea,
Hmm.
gram for gram through the thing? So
Hmm.
there were incidences of seniors in the tea industry who would be sitting in the tasting room, looking at their colleague, tasting a cup of tea and spitting it out, not knowing if it has cyanide, not knowing if the next spoonful of tea they take would kill them and they would die in the tasting room. You know,
Okay.
imagine the fear that thought puts in. So trying to hurt economically the country.
Hmm.
Thankfully, there was no cyanide in any tea. It was just a press piece put out there to harm.
Hmm. Hmm.
But one of the biggest problems that we as a business went through was that, bear in mind, our tea business, is based in Maskilia. The vast majority of the population there are Tamil. Many of our drivers were Tamil. One of the tactics that were employed by the Tamil Tigers was that they would use vehicles laden with explosive, and they would run them into buildings or blow them up. So you imagine you've got a lorry load full of
Oh
tea,
Lord.
either a Tamil driver or a Tamil, assistant in
Hmm.
the in the lorry.
Hmm.
And in Colombo, we used to have checkpoints
Hmm.
to search vehicles.
Hmm.
So you imagine when you're coming in a lorry and you're meeting that checkpoint, the fear that it puts not only in your own employees, but in the security forces that have seen their friends go up to these bombs. So many incidences like that have happened. Also, the other things that I remember growing up in Sri Lanka was that we used to have a lot of curfew. So you would have suicide bombs that would go off, and the whole country would be in curfew. The
Hmm.
whole country, 2-3 day curfew. You have to get curfew passes. You have to prove that your business, that you have to go to work, or you have to run a vehicle from one end of the country to the other, because there'll be no movement whatsoever. Having to deal with that because you are exporting tea to a global market. If you are
Hmm.
in the other end of the world, you can't. How can you tell someone, well, we can't ship your tea
Hmm.
because the lorries can't leave from the upcountry?
Hmm. Hmm.
I remember when I was a child, my own family would travel to the same location in 2 different vehicles, in 2 different routes, because if all the family are in one car and there's a bomb sitting on a bus.
Oh, so you have dealt with this.
Absolutely, yeah. I remember
Oh.
I remember many incidences where you'd go to the same location in 2 different cars because you don't want to put all the family members in one car. And if you're sitting behind a bus that has a bomb, who is going to one look after the business and who's going to look after the family members that aren't in the car? You know, and this is the
Oh.
reality for many families that lived in Sri Lanka. That
Okay.
lived in Sri Lanka. I mean, I remember my brother as a 3-year-old,
Hmm.
pretty much being strip searched at a security checkpoint in central Colombo. You I remember as a child going to school, and many children in UK schools would do sort of fire drills. We would do bomb drills. That if a bomb was ever placed in the school, what you would do, putting a pencil in your mouth and getting under the table, it's very normal because as a child you don't know any different.
Hmm. Hmm.
So that conflict had a huge impact on the country, on the economic position of the country, on the psyche of the country. But I think the true, the true story of it is that amongst all of this chaos, amongst all of this 30-year chaos of this war, we never, Sri Lanka never ever let the global teapot run dry. We carried on making tea, we carried on shipping tea, we carried on tasting tea, and we made sure that teapots around the world were still always
So
filled to the brim.
so you somehow went to the paperwork and making sure that okay, we are legitimate business, we are trying to actually do things and stuff like that.
Absolutely, not just us, but many businesses in Sri Lanka went through that, and it's
Okay.
very much forged us. And that's why I think when you go through events like COVID-19
Mm-hmm.
or the economic
Oh,
crisis that we
such
had in Sri
events
Lanka,
immune you to that as well.
they immune you to that.
Yeah.
You become more powerful as an individual, as a person, as a business when you
Hmm.
go through hard and tough
Hmm.
lessons, and experiences. So yeah.
True. Hmm. All right, I understand. Quite a thing to see, man. You went through a bus where your family is in the other bus and you don't know
Yeah.
that you are gonna meet at the other end or not.
Yeah.
Quite a thing.
You know.
All right, looking ahead now, we have passed that time. Where do you see PMDT headed in 5 to 10 years?
5 to 10 years.
What are the plans which you are willing to disclose?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I
Mhm.
think one of the big plans is very much looking at that sort of B2C sector,
Hmm.
not just providing tea to that B2C sector, but how we educate and provide experiences in that sector. So
Okay.
one of the big parts is the Colombo tasting room,
Mm-hmm.
where you visit us, learn from a professional level what is tea,
Mm-hmm.
and take a small interest. You can be someone who comes for like a 1 hour, 1.5 hour experience, or you can be someone who wants to come on University of Tea
Mm-hmm.
and learn 2 days in the tasting room, visit the estates, come with us, see the people,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and see the environment.
Mm-hmm.
Very much about the tourism side of tea.
All right.
The
Okay.
tourism side of tea and sharing
Mm-hmm.
our place, our passion, our people with people from all over the world who are interested to come and learn about these things and do these things.
Okay.
So yeah,
Okay.
very much
What
the
are
plans.
sure? Thank you. Sorry. What are you as an MD and Dananjaya Silva as a person have personal goals which you wanna have achieve, which you are willing to disclose?
For my personal goals,
Mm-hmm.
I think my personal goals are very much tacked into the business in some ways.
Mm-hmm.
So I think personally for me, I would like to see our revenue increase.
Mm-hmm.
I would like to see the amount of cups of tea that we provide
Mm-hmm.
globally increase. See how that footprint grows.
Mm-hmm.
What new markets we can go into.
Mm-hmm.
What new markets we can grow into,
So
but also
your when it comes to family business, your and business goals are aligned.
yes, yeah,
Yeah.
so very much looking at markets, but also looking at sharing part of Sri Lanka as well, and actually bringing people from those markets into country,
Mm-hmm.
and sharing for them to understand that root cause of that passion, because we can take tea to you, which is great, but you should come and see where our tea comes from for you to understand the passion and the love that goes into making that tea. You
Mm.
so it's a two way journey.
You're trying to make it two-way.
Yeah, because anything in life is duality, right?
Uh-huh.
You can't understand.
Have you watched Suits?
Yes,
Harvey Specter?
yes,
Do you know the line?
no. We're doing so well. We're doing so well. Yes. Then we got to know. Tell me.
Loyalty is a two-way street.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Because
Mm.
anything in life
Mm.
is duality.
Mm-hmm.
How can you know what is good if you haven't experienced the bad
Yeah, true.
in anything, right?
Mm-hmm.
How do you know that you're in day if you haven't seen night? So if
Mm-hmm.
you're drinking
Very
tea,
nice one. Very
yeah,
nice. Yeah, I like
if you're
that.
drinking tea and we're putting tea into your cup,
Mm-hmm.
you also at some point have to think, well, let me come and see them and come and understand
Mm-hmm.
from a grassroots level, like from the environment we're here,
Mm-hmm.
what makes my tea in my cup,
Mm-hmm.
So to do more of that.
All right. Last one. What one learning advice you wish to share in your 38 years, 39 years of journey?
What one learning advice?
Mhm. Be it to young entrepreneurs, be it to like just like that. You wish to share that.
I think,
This will help you if you know this.
yeah. I think, we are living in a world today, Sidraj, even what you're doing right now.
Hmm.
There's a lot of there's a lot of noise.
Hmm.
There's a lot of noise. a lot of video, a lot of photos, a lot of people's opinions, a lot of information,
Hmm.
right? And especially if you're young, at any point in anyone's life, you can be overwhelmed by all of this opinion.
Oh, true.
And I
True.
think the thing I would say is that, for anyone, one takeaway that I could probably offer, that I've probably started to do a bit more, is to actually sit and listen to yourself.
Hmm.
Sit and listen to yourself and ask yourself, why am I feeling like this? Am I, you might be trying to work out which path to take.
Hmm.
And sometimes you're consulting for everyone else's opinion.
Hmm.
This person said that person said this person did this. And sometimes you need to just sit down
Hmm.
and listen to what you're feeling, and get to know you. Otherwise, you end up being, brother, you end up being like a dog chasing its tail, or like a deer that's, in the forest. It's running around the forest, wondering where that musky smell is coming from, not realizing it's coming from within you. You know,
Hmm.
and you're
Hmm.
searching the forest, where's that smell coming from, but not to sit and wait, hang about, it's coming from me.
Hmm.
So I think that one takeaway I'd say to anybody, young, old, or whatever, is actually we're living in a time where there's so much information.
Hmm.
Sometimes in your own life, the
Hmm.
best advice you can give is just by listening to yourself deep inside you and then going forward. You know?
All right, what you want, you can check that out.
Yeah.
All right, thank you so much for coming in. I am glad there were no problems. Everything went smoothly, and we enjoyed this atmosphere.
Beautiful
We
atmosphere.
have Dananjaya's wife behind the camera, helping me out every just to check everything is going fine. Thank you, Carissa. And that's it. That's a wrap on this one. And hope you like this episode. I am glad it went as per the conversation which I expected, and want you to listen from Dananjaya and the PMD tea and everything, the tea experience. And I'll see you in the next one. Thank you.
Thank you, brother.
Thank you very much.